Hi, my name is Nate, and welcome back to the Life with Nate YouTube channel. So today we're going to be talking about discussing the pros and cons of living in Washington, D.C. So for a little bit of context, I moved here 2 years ago from Maine because I had a job there, and then some stuff happened, and then I just had to move. So I moved to Washington, D.C. because I ended up getting a job here, like most people do, because D.C. is a highly transitory city. That's the common response is like, why did you move to Washington, D.C.? I moved here for a job. And so I wish I would have found a video kind of explaining like 5 or so main pros and cons of living in Washington, D.C., just when it comes to like career development or living here or prices and stuff like that. Because I know the feeling of moving to a new city or location and having a massive amount of anxiety of like, where do I live? Where do I look? What factors do I consider when I'm moving to a new location? And so YouTube is a great tool for that because you can find videos just like this one where they break down the pros and cons of living in a new city, a new location, a new state, even a new country sometimes. It's really cool. So today I'm going to be using my 2 years of experience to explain to you some pros and cons for anyone that's either looking to move to Washington, D.C. or maybe visit as well. A lot of people are here for internships, which is like a common thing. So we call them summer interns because they literally come here for 3 months and then they leave, or fall interns, which is a common thing. So without further ado, let's get started. And then as a side note, I will also be using my handy dandy whiteboard as an educational prop for today. So if it looks like I'm pausing during the video when I'm writing stuff, that explains why. So the first pro of living in Washington, D.C., public transportation. So DC has a great metro system. It's not the greatest in the world, but it is pretty cool to begin with. So DC has a strong metro system that connects pretty much DC proper area and then also goes into a lot of other states, like for example, Virginia and Maryland. They're adding, I think, a new line as well called the Purple Line, in addition to like the red, yellow, green, blue, orange, and silver line. So what you have is a very interconnected city. It makes it very easy to go like from one end to another, or if you're commuting as well. A lot of people use Metro to commute. And so the Metro system is very cool. The social media team, as a side note for the Metro system here, does a great job of like just letting you know like when there's going to be like, alerts, the rail is down and stuff like that. The bus system is also pretty interesting here as well. There's a notorious bus system close to where I live here in the Noma area called like the X2 and the X9. It's got some reputations for having some wild people on there, but the bus system is also pretty cool as well because it is very consistent and can get you from one end of the city to another pretty quickly, I would say. The fares can sometimes vary, like it'll depend on like where you go from one end of the city to another, but typically those are affordable, and the city also has discount programs. For example, if you're a low-income family and you don't meet like a certain threshold, they have discounts, I think, for families that are, on hard times, as well as students, and then also elderly people too. So one caveat about the metro system is that unfortunately it only runs until like midnight to 1 a.m. And so that is like a con to a pro, is that the metro system stops around midnight to 1 a.m., which is infuriating because New York, as an example, is 24/7. So there is that to consider. Let's move on. Our next pro, free museums. So DC is an amazing place to stimulate your mind because with the museums here in DC, they are all free, or at least the major ones are. Like for example, the Smithsonian museums, like the National Museum of like African Art or Science, or any of the other major Smithsonian museums. I'm probably getting the titles wrong, but whatever. All of those are free. It's really cool. Like sometimes you'll have to get timed entry passes to like go in and out of museums for special events, but for the most part, you can literally just walk in and have a great time. They also have like a lot of after art hours as well. Like I remember going to the National Museum of Women in the Arts. I did a YouTube video about that as well, actually. And they have after hour parties, which is pretty cool. So a lot of the museums, the major ones in DC, are free. However, you also have a lot of not so well-known museums, like for example, the Museum of Illusions, I think is like $25, which is like very interesting. So it depends on what you want to do. But yeah, free museums is the second pro. Third, so embassy and cultural events. Okay, so this one hits a little bit closer to home because for my I guess if you want to call it like a second job. I run a creative brand called Embassy Life in DC. You've probably seen me post like a lot of embassy related content like on this channel. And so when it comes to that type of thing, DC has 175 embassies and around 20 or so cultural centers. And so what you have is a cultural tapestry in the DC area when it comes to embassy and cultural events. I could spend easily a series of YouTube videos explaining like what I do, what I go to, but like just search up the Embassy Life in DC playlist like on my YouTube channel and you'll know what I'm talking about. Not all of the embassies like have events, and of course it depends on budget, staff, all that great stuff, but in general, embassy events are a very unique aspect of DC that you won't find anywhere else. Like, for example, there are consulates, right? Like in other major cities across the US, like LA, New York, whatever. But they don't have, if they do, it's very rare, but they don't have like embassy events held at the actual embassy. So as an example, last Saturday, there was a Venetian ball gala at the Embassy of Italy. You can't find that anywhere else. You know what I mean? Maybe you can find that in some US embassies around the world that are stationed in different countries, but it's incredible. Like, I go to embassy events, not every week, you know, because I want to diversify what I do with my life, but I go to them on a pretty regular basis. And like, sometimes it's ridiculous to me that like I can say to a friend when I'm on the phone, you know, like, hey John, like I went to the embassy of France for a AI summit, or I was at the embassy of Haiti for like a culinary education, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, just being able to say that is like incredible. And then on the cultural aspect, DC has a lot of cultural festivals that are also happening like at the same time, which is pretty awesome. Like, you have like cultural festivals like happening all the time, from celebrating actual DC culture with go-go music, which is like a specific niche of music which entices a lot of people, to, you know, celebrating the Chinese Lunar New Year, like during the whole month of a Lunar New Year festival. So that's the third. Fourth, career development opportunities. So a lot of you know that in your job hunt, or maybe you don't, you always have to be ABN, which means always be networking. So DC is a place where you are always networking with people. And so in terms of career development opportunities, remember that old expression, or maybe you don't, because you might be younger, like watching this. So for those of you who don't know, there's an expression in the job market where it's not what you know, it's who you know. And so that holds very true in the city alone. Everyone is connected in the city. It's insane. Like, from senators to major nonprofit leaders to literally any sector you think of. Consulting, oh my god, the big four, Deloitte, Booz Allen, like everyone's connected, or at least knows someone here. So in terms of career development opportunities, the opportunities are out there with a lot of networking events you can talk to, or you'd be surprised, even farmers markets. There's a lot of people that go to farmers markets that you see celebrities, you see politicians. It's insane. So in terms of career development opportunities, DC is the place to be. And for a final pro, architecture style. So you might not necessarily care about this, but it's kind of a joie de vivre, joy of life, in my opinion. So DC is a very beautiful city. You can find a lot of European traces of architecture depending on which neighborhoods you go to. And during the fall, it turns gorgeous with the foliage of the leaves like falling down. Like, you can literally walk through different neighborhoods like DuPont Circle, Adams Morgan, Noma, couple of other places too. And like, kind of every neighborhood sometimes has like a distinct architectural style. So DC, a lot of people compare DC to, for example, Paris, because it feels like a lot of Parisian architecture, European architecture is in DC. And in some cases that's true. In some cases it's not. But regardless, like the architectural style of the buildings here, you have a lot of like colonial buildings also, because again, a lot of history here, like on the East Coast. So you have that like blend of like European and like colonial architecture, which is pretty cool. So to wrap up really quickly, because I don't want this YouTube video to be like 30 minutes long, in terms of pros, we have great public transportation, also some delays and all that good stuff on the metro and bus lines. We have free museums for the Smithsonian. We have embassy and cultural events, which I go to constantly because I'm a huge nerd when it comes to that. Career development opportunities. Everyone's connected here. Everyone knows each other. be a little weary about that point as well, because like a lot of relationships in the city can be very transactional. So like you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, or in some cases people will use you for your connections. So just always be aware of that. And then fifth is the architecture styles in DC. So this is the pro chart. Excuse the atrocious handwriting, but those are 5 pros. So let's move on to the other side, which are the cons. So as always, when you live in a major city in any part of the US, there's always going to be a pro and con. So I'll include some timestamps on the video so that way you can skip ahead if you want to. So the first con is the cost of living. The cost of living in this city is insane. Like, I'm not even kidding. So compared to other places like New York, for example, it's not as bad, obviously, but it's still pretty expensive to live here. According to a study that I found, the average price of rent in this city is 43% more expensive than the average national rent statistic. So for example, according to apartments.com, it costs on average 2.3K, 2,300 a month to rent out a one bedroom apartment in DC. Of course, that's going to vary depending on where you are. So for example, where I live, it's not in, the fancy neighborhoods of DuPont, Circle, and Adams Morgan. So my rent is not as high. But it's still pretty expensive, not gonna lie. And it's very hard for people that are just starting out in their careers to go to a place like DC and expect to live in a one bedroom when they can't even afford to rent out a studio or an efficiency unit. So there's a lot of problems with that. It depends on which side you're on, Affordable Housing Act, all that great stuff. But just know that the cost of living in this city is insane. The second thing, the summers. So I don't know about y'all, but so I grew up in desert and tropical countries as a kid, Egypt, Cambodia. So you should say that I'm used to it, but DC summers are terrible. So summer months, typically start, let's say late May to early September, in that range. I know that almost includes partially fall as well, but during the summer, it is bad. I'm not even joking. The humidity index goes up to 90%. The mosquitoes are out and you're constantly being bit all over you. It's disgusting. And the heat waves are intense. Everywhere had a heat wave this summer, it feels like. But for example, in DC, it got to easily 100 degrees plus, which folks in Arizona might laugh at, but with the humidity, it was really bad. Seriously, the city almost had to declare heat emergencies for a straight week because of the fact that the heat is not what does you in. It's the humidity and the mosquitoes on top of that. And then people get irritable. It's just terrible. So the summer months in DC are very tough. Just be aware of that. Job hunting. So as we all know, the job market right now is not exactly doing the best, despite what the news claims. The Federal Reserve is cutting rates as of early October. Job openings are going up, but there are signs that the economy, in terms of job openings, is also cooling down as well. So if you're one of the few that got laid off, unfortunately, because you work in the tech sector or the nonprofit world or whatever, job hunting in the city is very tough. A lot of people in DC are very educational. It seems the basic level of education in this city is easily just a master's. Everyone has that. And then the PhD is the new master's. So if you're one of the unfortunate few, and of course this will depend on your sector, if you are a white collar worker like myself, a blue collar worker like some of my family are, it just depends. Typically, job hunting in the city is very tough, especially for white-collar positions. There's think tanks, nonprofits, government jobs, all that stuff. But you're going up against people that have a significant amount of experience, connections, because let's be honest, at the end of the day, when you're job hunting, sometimes it's who you know that gets you the job, not what you know. So that's how it works. So ABN, always be networking. So just be aware of that. If you're moving to the city without having something lined up, I would caution you not to do that, because as soon as you want to hit the ground running, right? You want to start your first day, not stressful, all that great stuff. So if you're moving to the city and you have nothing lined up, you can potentially find something quickly in the service industry, because let's be honest, places like that are always hiring. But if you're trying to get a research position, a think tank position, That takes time, and then you're going up against people that have lived here for years on top of that. So just be aware of that. Job hunting is very tough. Traffic. So traffic is tough, I'm not gonna lie. And I just realized that I haven't been showing you the board as soon as I write each con. I apologize. But now you can see. So cost of living, summers, job hunting is tough, and then traffic for the cons. So DC, I think, in an article that I read about a year ago or something like that, ranked as the 5th worst place for traffic in the United States. And you honestly see it. Like, this city was not designed to handle, like, this many cars, like, going through day in and day out. Couple that with, like, crazy folks from, like, Maryland and Virginia that don't know how to drive. Driving on the East Coast is extremely hostile. I remember I was talking to an Uber driver this week that said that, like, the skill of driving and just like the temperamental nature of folks have also like worsened over the past couple of years since the pandemic. It's just gotten really bad. So that being said, there's a point to this tirade. So with traffic, if you're moving to DC and you have a car, my advice for you is it depends on where you live, because insurance rates are also through the roof when it comes to living in this damn city. So context, I moved here 2 years ago and I had a Honda Civic. Love the car, reminded me memories of, my family in California, all that great stuff. But I quickly found out that the metro and the bus was an easy substitute for my car. So again, it depends on where you live. If you live in the suburban areas of, let's say, like Virginia or Maryland, then you need a car, obviously, to go back and forth for commuting. But that being said, the traffic here is horrendous. So you're spending easily an hour up to more when it comes to literally like trying to go from point A to point B. So a lot of people commute with park and rides, where they park their car at the metro line at the very edge of the city, and then they'll commute in. So that being said, my advice to you is this, and this is my personal advice. All of this is my personal advice with my living experiences. So I recognize that depending on who you are, your circumstances are different, all that great stuff. But if you're living in the DC proper area, and your job, let's say, is in the Federal Triangle or somewhere in the city that's close to a metro stop, for the love of God, please just use the metro. Parking in the city is horrendous. Like, I'm not even joking. Like, it's $50 for like an hour sometimes, from what I've seen or whatever. Slight over exaggeration. But at the same time, parking in the city is terrible. And then also to couple with that, your insurance rates go through the roof. I was paying like, I think, $150, a month, maybe less, for Geico in Maine. It almost went up to $350 in the city. Maybe I had to switch carriers, but that's besides the point. If you're in DC proper, chances are you probably won't need a car. But if you live in the suburbs, then you might. Just something to consider. And so the final thing that I will say is the rise of crime. So, this is going to be kind of a controversial hot topic, because whenever you discuss crime rates in any major city in the United States, here we go, rise of crime, right there. Whenever you discuss like crime rates like in any city of the United States, people like to get butthurt. So, I'll just tell you what I've seen, and if it's controversial, then so be it. So, in DC has always had kind of a little bit of a crime problem. Like, I've only been here 2 years, but I do remember reading articles like, pre-2010 that some areas of the city were really bad, like to the point where like the National Guard wouldn't even go in there because it was just like really terrible. So since the early like 2010s, from what people have told me, the city has really like cleaned up in terms of like making it like a safe place to live. And for Christ's sakes, like the President of the United States like literally works in the center of the Capitol. And we have crime problems. Like, this shouldn't be a thing. But I will say this. There has been a noticeable uptick in juvenile crime rates, like throughout like DC proper, and like also into the suburban areas as well. Unfortunately, from what I've read and from what I've seen, and this seems to be kind of a common pattern in a lot of major cities, potentially in blue states maybe, I don't know. A lot of crime laws are very lax. And so, like, for example, if you shoplift, then typically, you don't get like a sentencing or whatever. and you might get released in the same day, and that encourages people to go out and do things. Of course, you have your average stabbings like in any city and stuff like that, but there were some really shocking moments of the year where safe neighborhoods, like for example, people don't think, like DuPont Circle, Adams Morgan, Noma, all that stuff. There was like a shooting, in each of those neighborhoods that I remember very vividly. I wasn't there. I just remember reading it like on the Washington Post, where everyone apparently has a gun nowadays, and like tempers get like out of hand, and then someone gets shot in the middle of a active crowd of people just trying to get to work, or just trying to go home, or just trying to enjoy their lives. So there has been kind of a noticeable rise of crime in the past, I would say 2 years, from what I've seen and from what I've heard. Is it something to be afraid of? No, I don't think so. You just have to be aware of your surroundings, just like in any major city. I mean, I'm sure New York is no different. Like, I don't live in New York, but from what I've seen, again, like there are different areas of the city that are higher crime statistics wise. Like, it just depends. So, enough about that. This is not a video about, DC is a crime-ridden city. You shouldn't move here. It's not the point of this. But it is an aspect of living in any major city that you have to be aware of, is crime rates and stuff like that. So, to sum it all up, we have 5 pros and we have 5 cons of living in DC, and I'll quickly just review them. So, on the pros side, and keep in mind that this is not an exhaustive list, I just didn't want the YouTube video to be like an hour long. So, on the pro side, we have great public transportation system, metro and bus, free museums, embassy and cultural events, career development opportunities, and then finally, DC architecture styles, which are very cool. And then on the con side, we have an absurd cost of living, in some cases, for a 1-bedroom studio. We have very atrocious summers for heat waves, humidity, and mosquitoes. Job hunting is tough if you, have been unfortunately laid off and you're trying to find something quick. Again, sector specific, situation specific, experience specific. Traffic is very tough, so consider whether or not you need a car when you live here. And then finally, crime statistics, because unfortunately that's a major reality of any major city in the US, is crime statistics that you got to consider, especially when you're living in a potential area. So that's all for today. Those are 5 cons and 5 pros of living in the DC area. Disclaimer that this was based on my living experience. My situation may be different from yours. I hope you enjoyed the video. I will see you later. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe for more content. See you next time.